So, if you're like me and find it unusual to listen to a disembodied voice, I thought it might be helpful that you could see a picture of me. And please know that I will be your voiceover guide for this module. So, you might ask yourself, why a speech language pathologist? Very often, when I meet patients for the first time, they might have a question about why they have been referred, and that's usually due to a lack of understanding of the scope of practice that a speech language pathologist is engaging within. I have patients who say, there's nothing wrong with my speech, and it's not until we start to unpack the work that I do and that other speech pathologists are doing that helps patients to understand that the cognitive communication challenges that they have are really best met by this group of professionals. So, in conjunction with the rest of a team, speech language pathologists can help with these things that are on your screen. So if you have concerns with your attention or your memory or your difficulty with understanding or comprehending what others are saying to you, and quite commonly we hear slowed processing. So I have a hard time keeping up with the conversation, particularly if there is more than one speaker or there's a lot of cross talking within a group. We hear difficulties, of course, with word finding or formulation of thoughts and ideas, and maybe losing place when people are speaking. There can also be truly, speech difficulties, but I would say that's less common than we would say word finding and formulation of ideas would be in this population of concussion. We treat problems with reading. Very often, people are losing their place more often. They're having difficulty retaining what they've read. They're finding that they have to read and reread material, which is a source of anxiety, particularly if you happen to be a student or someone who works and has to read large volumes of material, including things that are on email or electronic or textbooks. Um, and of course, everyday reading. Writing issues, so speech pathologists can be found helping individuals to sort of compose thoughts and ideas and get those things down. Again, it could range from everything from texting to emailing to essay composition and just documentation for work or school. Speech pathologists commonly are assisting individuals who have challenges or changes within social communication. These are the skill sets that we use as we interact with others and the world around us. So your ability to understand when it's good to take a turn, when it's appropriate to speak up, when it's important to hold back, the ability to read others and understand others' intentions, and also to be able to take different perspectives or theory of mind. And so when people have had a brain injury, sometimes they really are challenged within their social interactions with others. And that's a really important area, I think, to talk about because it's often missed and certainly something that speech pathologists can help with. Um, Speech paths are also helping with problem solving, and we know that individuals after injury sometimes are overwhelmed when they encounter problems and are having more difficulty seeing things from multiple perspectives. So issues with dealing with problems and systematically working through problems can be helped. Planning and organizing. So sometimes we refer to this as executive function. So your ability to, for example, get to an appointment that you have and be there on time and leave enough time for you to drive and anticipate that there might be traffic. Organize your days so that you are able to accomplish the things that you set out to do or need to do or want to do. So all of those planning and organization skills are something that speech language pathologists can help out with as well. You may have, as you've listened to this list, understand more fully, I hope, some of the work you may be doing as you encounter speech language pathologists as part of your team. So hopefully you enjoyed that short video, and I think it's just a great reminder that we can make small changes or tiny tweaks that can have a really significant impact on both recovery and the quality of our lives. And so I love this short video for its use of humor in taking something that's really quite familiar and overlearned, and thinking about ways we can change and adapt it to make life just that much easier. I like to think about the work that we do as a team here at Parkwood as these tiny tweaks that can hopefully help you out as well. So I'm looking forward to hopefully having a few moments where you say, aha, that's for me, and I can make a small change that maybe can have a big impact. I will ask you now to just think for a moment about some of your current memory issues. We're going to transition into talking first about memory. And if you could just jot down a few points on a scrap piece of paper, and if you haven't already got a paper and pen with you, now would be a good time to pause and have that in front of you as you're listening in and hopefully able to make some notes about the content you're hearing. So just ask you to write down a couple of examples of your memory difficulties. One of the most common things I hear about from patients is memory difficulties. And most people would arrive in my office once they understand the scope of practice that I have. They begin talking about memory as sort of the most significant challenge or change since injury. And I do like to think about the interrelationship between attention and memory, and the relationship is quite important to understand that if we have not been able to focus our attention or pay attention to something, it is going to be really difficult for that to get to memory. And so people often do not think about the contributions of their focus or concentration on later recall. Earlier, as we started out in this presentation, I asked you to think about what is going on in the environment around you as you listen. So thinking about background noise or visual distractions that might detract from your attention at the first look, but also contribute negatively to your ability to remember or recall later. Now I'd like to play for you a simulation of what it's like to be working on paying attention to one thing in the presence of background noise. So this effect is the cocktail effect, and so I'm just going to introduce a bit of noise now and ask you to think about whether or not it's easier to understand me with or without this competing background information. You may find your attention wandering between the noises, some of those other conversations, and the message that I'm delivering, which should be the one you're paying attention to. So is it easier to understand what I'm saying without that background noise? And could you learn to pay attention to your environment so that you can improve the likelihood of both attending and later remembering information? This is called selective attention. So thinking further about background noise and the negative impact of that on attention and memory, you want to think about ways to give yourself a break and give your brain a rest and turn off excess background noise. Things can include car radios, televisions that are even a room or two away, dishwashers running in the background, even the computer and fan associated with your laptop or your device that you're using can actually pull attention away from the task of doing whatever it is that's at hand. Washing machines and other electronics are all things that might be working in the background and pulling away your attention in the foreground. Now I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment to play this simulation of another example of selective attention, and the instructions will be given as you play this video. Continuing our conversation about attention would not be complete without discussing multitasking. Many patients would come and complain about changes to their ability to multitask, sort of holding that out as the all-important skill set in many of the jobs and school academic functions that they do. However, evidence says that really no one can multitask effectively and that the human brain cannot really perform more than one task at a time, particularly those that require high-level brain functioning all at the same time. So you need to give yourself a break and understand that multitasking is overrated. One of the things that is important, though, is to think about high stakes versus low stakes. So, what are situations where you find yourself devoting more attention to something that than you should, or less attention to something than you should? So, asking yourself, how important is the task or conversation to me? If it's really important, then we want to think about those background controls. So going somewhere quiet, turning off all of those excess noises, and giving the task your undivided attention. When we think about ways to treat attention issues, we sometimes will think about apps, applications, various games, and I'll talk about this a little bit further on as well, but really the tried and true ways and probably less expensive and invested ways would be things that you may already be doing. So for example, many of the patients we see have moved to audiobooks, and many of those audiobooks can be obtained for free. There's a couple I've listed here, one called Cloud Library and the other called Libby. And all you need is a free library card from really any library to access an endless number of audiobooks. I do get asked about the impact on reading and will I lose my ability to read if I'm not actually looking at printed text? And research would show that the utilization of audiobooks is very effective in stimulating areas that are associated with reading circuits, and so definitely you can lean into that one. There are several hearing practice apps out there, and there are different ways that sound can be presented to you to learn to cope with listening to that in different contexts as well. So thinking about the cafe noise I played earlier, or background talk television or talk radio. There are ways that you can get apps that do this, but you can even just practice this at home, sort of changing up your listening environments. You're reading a book that is not high stakes, it's not important, it's for fun. You may want to start introducing a bit of background noise. I actually attended my kids' soccer games while I was simultaneously doing some light reading, and I was really aware of the workout that I was getting and trying to pay attention to the task of the game, and then listen to the background noise of the game in the context of trying to do some reading. We also want to think about treating attention through prevention, which is to say to control distractions, whether those are visual distractions, auditory noise distractions. We know that there's a lot of value in meditation and mindfulness practice, and encouraging those of you who have not already been implementing that daily practice into your day. Please do take a look at meditation. I'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but there's very good evidence that this improves our attention, among other things. We want to practice again in low stakes tasks with increasing background noise, because we don't want to find ourselves avoiding all noise. We live in a fairly noisy world, and being able to cope with increasing background noise should be a goal in treating your attention. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about memory, and just pointing out that there are actually different types of memory. We're going to be talking and contrasting short-term memory and long-term memory. And when we think about concussion, we're usually talking about problems that are in the working memory or short-term memory. So people usually will remember, where they went to school, what public school and high school. They may remember well dates from the past. What they struggle with are things that are happening more like in the day or in the day before. So they may have more difficulty and really be surprised by the fact that they cannot remember kind of what they had for supper yesterday or the names of people that they've just met. And so this is a real struggle for people to come to understanding that there are different types of memory that are impacted following concussion, and typically, again, long term is preserved with more deficits and problems in short term. Short-term memory is definitely something that is affected following concussion, and we know that information in short-term really lasts for a short bit of time, 15 to 30 seconds, and does not always go into long-term memory. And there is this rule of things that are remembered, and in that there are typically abilities to remember 7 plus or minus 2 things, so down as low as 5 things and up as many as 9 is a typical kind of working memory experience for people. And so you can think about a grocery store list here where you might have a few items that you're trying to remember when you get to the store. This would say that we would remember as few as 5 and as many as 9 of the items without making a list. So there are some short-term memory pitfalls and things that I have found in my years of working in brain injury. And one of the most common is that people often think because something has made sense that it is going to be remembered. They also think that if something is very emotional, that they're also likely to remember that. And that actually doesn't really show out in the research, and it doesn't show it in the patient experience either. So just because you understand something, it does not necessarily mean that it's gone to long-term memory or that you will remember it. So you might read a passage for school or for work, and of course all of that makes good sense to you as you read it, and you might equate that with being able to remember it later or retell it later, and that is just simply not the case. There actually is a bit more work that we need to do when we're working to remember something. So I thought it would be fun to play a memory game, and we're going to do this with something we call tray activity. I'm going to ask you to be honest as you do this activity, because I'm going to give you 1 minute to look at these items that I'm going to present on the next screen. Of course, it's a recording, so you are fully within your reign to take a longer look at the tray activity, but I'll ask you to maybe think about a minute of time, and here are those items. So again, we're looking at these items for 1 minute. Okay, so on your piece of paper now, I'm going to ask you to write down as many of the names of the objects that you can remember from the tray activity. You may again need to pause your recording right here, the playback of the presentation, to give yourself time before the answer is revealed. So spoiler alert, the next slide coming after this one is going to show you those items again, so you probably would wish to pause just to make sure we don't spoil the fun. And I'm going to bring back those objects now, and I've organized them. Hopefully immediately you can see some patterns. Brains really love patterns. We love to see things that make sense and are orderly. So hopefully if I asked you to call out some of the ways in which this tray activity has now been organized, you would be able to call out that you see 5 different groups now of things that are foods and drinks, musical instruments, transportation, office items, and then something to do with numbers. And if I asked you to take a look at the food and drink group and look for a pattern, I'm wondering if you could see that pattern there. Now you are again welcome to pause my recording here to take a look and see if you can figure it out before I, spoiler alert, tell you that this is organized alphabetically. So apples to bananas to cheese to Diet Coke to egg to frog. And I know some of you are looking at that going, why is the frog in the food category? And that's because I needed to group him somewhere, and arguably in some places people do eat frogs' legs, and so I've grouped him into that group to make it easier to remember the number of items I have here on the tray activity. I would also be interested when you were doing your recall if you had a sense of how many total items there were. Many people do not count the number of objects that they're expecting to recall, and so hopefully you did that. So you should have a total of 20 items here. So when we group or chunk objects together like I've done here for you, it's going to make them easier to remember. So for example, if I look at the food group, I would count that I've got 6 items within that food and drink group, and I know they're also organized alphabetically. Music group has 3 objects, and if I say them aloud, drum, guitar, treble clef, I'm more likely to retain information that I've used that strategy to encode. You might also notice a pattern of number of objects. So the musical instruments here of 3 in total corresponds to the number of items in the numbers group. Over here that I have the 3 and the 2 of hearts card, and then the die that says that's showing 4. So we can remember that there are 2 groups of 3, musical instruments and then numbers. And if we look at transportation, where there is the hot air balloon, transport, rocket, and double-decker bus, that number 4 is the same number of objects that is in the office supplies group, where we have the calculator, the paper clip, the pencil, and that 3.5 floppy disk that's no longer in play. So you can remember that there are 2 groups of 3, musical instruments and numbers, and 2 groups for the transportation and the office supply group, and then the largest group is the group of 6, which is the food and drink category. So I'm going to go forward here, and I'm again going to give you time to jot down from memory those objects that you can remember. Please use strategies of counting how many there objects there were in total, how many groups or how many ways we could chunk the pictures, and then the number of objects within each of the categories. And I'll let you have a moment to jot those down. Again, you may want to pause recording so that you can get some time to record all of the items you can remember. It's my hope that this recall task now will be more productive, that you would have remembered more items on this recall task because we've used a number of strategies to get there. So saying items aloud, grouping objects together, counting them, visualizing them, sometimes even where they're located on a page, how they were organized, and then of course on the food and drink category we had used somewhat of a mnemonic, alphabetized those objects. So hopefully you've been able to improve your score from the first recall of the tray activity to the second. This leads us very nicely into the topic of chunking, which is a memory strategy. If I ask you to look at the list here, and I give you 15 seconds to memorize these letters, you might actually feel a little bit overwhelmed with that task. But if we employ chunking and we group those letters into 4 bytes, CBS, NASA, IBM, and BMW, it's probable that you would do better in the recall when those items are grouped together rather than a single string of letters, which is much, much harder to recall. So why does the strategy of chunking work? Well, it's back to this 7 plus or minus 2 rule. Generally, if we can get a string of things, whether they're letters, like in that example, or other things, and we can group them into things that make more sense based on our world knowledge. In this case, we made CBS, NASA, IBM, and BMW. Mnemonic, if you will, and remembering in 4 groups is much easier than remembering in 13 distinct parts. So chunking works for those reasons. If we think about real life uses of chunking and how you could implement this into everyday practice, you can think about a grocery list in the same way. So if we have a list of items we're hoping to remember when we get to the grocery store, by now, hopefully we're using lists and jotting things down. But if you think about this list as one continuous, unorganized grouping, it's going to be a lot more difficult to remember when you get to the store than, say, if we were to take the same list of grocery items and put them into categories of frozen foods, dairy, bakery, and fruits and vegetables. It's also going to make our trip to the store probably more efficient because we will be maybe even further organizing in terms of the layout of the store. So if we know that as we walk into the store, the first thing we encounter is going to be produce, then maybe we want to organize our list so that fruits and vegetables go first, and that's followed by the dairy department and on to frozen foods, finishing with bakery. So we can really use chunking in real life, both in grouping the category of words within the category, and also maybe thinking about the layout when it is indeed a grocery store shop. Memory strategies also include those things that are association. We know that it can be problematic if we learn 2 pieces of information that are closely related, can cause confusion, but we also know that forming associations can help us to make distinctions. So if I give the example back to my name at the very beginning of this presentation, I did introduce myself and I showed a picture of me. Incidentally, this is not me on this picture now, but I'm wondering how many of you have forgotten my name. So if you're honest with yourself and saying, can you recall who I am? If you could not recall who I am, but you were able to look at this slide and you can recognize my face from when I showed it earlier, you would be able to maybe make associations between my name, Penny, and the copper coin that used to be in circulation as part of our currency. So associating my name with this coin can help you remember me the next time you encounter me or see my face. And I know this works because I have actually run into people outside the hospital who tell me that they recall my name because they've made this association and have held on to it for long periods of time afterwards. So the other cool thing about my name is there's a lot of expressions associated with penny. So penny for your thoughts, or the penny from the Big Bang Theory. So I cannot tell you how many days I have people knock penny, 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 because they're making an association between my name and the Big Bang Theory character. This is my colleague Valerie, and her name, of course, starts with V, and we could think about an association here with the shape of a V and the word valley, or maybe making an association with another Valerie that you know. So there are visualization strategies. One of those techniques when we have been in person that I've talked to the group about is a strategy of maybe closing your eyes and imagining a funny picture in your mind's eye of me with a very large copper penny balancing on the top of my head. And maybe you could visualize me walking around with this a very large copper penny on the top of my head, and maybe I go to exit to the room, but I forget that the penny is on the top of my head, and it causes me to hit the door frame with my coin on the top of my head as I try to exit my room. This strategy of visualizing something funny or something unusual really helps to make it more salient and more likely that you'd recall it at a later point in time. So the more silly the story, the more outrageous the story that you use to encode, the more likely it is that you would remember that story and that association later. So I want to talk about this concept of distributed practice. And when we think about how we might have approached our studies, our academic pursuits, many people, when I ask them to raise their hands around who crammed before tests and examinations, I see a lot of hands. And so most times we try to sort of push through, and we hear this from patients talking about pushing through symptoms or pushing past the point of fatigue. And this pushing or cramming at the last minute is actually not something that we see favorable in the evidence for, how we improve memory or how we improve attention skills. So the concept of distributed practice is such that we work on something for a period of time, then we take a break from it, and we may come back and review a little bit of the information at a later point in time, and then continue studying something new, and then taking a break, and then returning to it again at different points in time. So this is the idea of, you have an examination, you spread the study sessions out over several weeks, rather than doing what probably many of us have done in the past, which is to cram on the last few nights. Pulling all-nighters is just not effective. So it is really important, the concept of pacing and planning, and I think this goes nicely with the concept of distributed practice. So if we map what we need to accomplish into different days and spaced out into shorter sessions, that's going to be a lot better. And this is particularly true when we're learning something new. The example I like to give is, working with a new piece of software like a web browser, or even if you get a new smartphone, the inclination is for us to sit down with something new and just kind of push on through it. But if we preserve some time in shorter sessions, we're actually going to do better with remembering it over the long run, which is really what all of us are chasing when we're trying to improve memory function. The concept of prospective memory is this idea of remembering to remember things in the future. So when we have been in person, before coming to the classroom, people are required to check into the reception area before heading to the room. But many people, after they've been attending the group for a couple of weeks, will sort of forget to check in with that. And that's an example of a lapse in prospective memory. Prospective memory is also what we do when we need to take something with us to an appointment. So if you have a medical appointment and you need to bring some documents or some other tasks or list with you, or list of medications or the medications themselves, and you forget to do that, that is a lapse in prospective memory. So it's remembering to remember things in the future. And so one of the things that really helps with memory in general, but in particular for prospective memory, is the writing of things down. And so there are endless options for tools that people can use, whether these are digital tools like our smartphones or other devices that can record for calendar entries, as well as paper and pencil options. I still carry a paper and pencil day planner, and I'm pretty much writing everything day to day in there, and also using it as almost a diary to record things that I need to know in the future as well as current state. So we set, if we're using electronic devices, we can obviously leverage the reminder features and set reminders, and sometimes for some people multiple reminders, and we can also set reminders by geographical or location settings. So for example, if you are attending an appointment at Parkwood and you would like to be reminded when you leave the house for that appointment to bring I don't know, a list of something that you wanted to share with your clinician, or you had to return something to Parkwood, you can actually set uh, your smartphone, to cue you that as you're getting closer to Parkwood or you're leaving the house, that you need to remember something. So reminders can be both set by time, but they can also be set for geographical or location. So it's good to keep that in mind. And if you have inclination to use that technology, to maybe explore that as an option to helping guide your memory and improve your perspective memory. So it is not a crutch to write things down. It is not working your memory to record things and have reminders set. It's actually really important that you lean into these technologies and strategies to improve overall memory gain. Another thing that people don't think about in terms of ease of remembering is the use of white space. This applies kind of both in terms of paper and pencils, and as well as workspaces and home spaces, and anywhere you might find yourself working or needing to do your best. White space, if you look at the image on the left, you can see sort of a serene, peaceful space there. And this other one contrasted on the right is just more jam-packed and maybe a bit more distracting. But we know that the use of white space, again, whether it's tidy spaces, uncluttered spaces, as well as how we organize ourselves in paper and pencil, day planners, even in my emailing, I can think about how much more I'm aware of the need to put spaces in between my paragraphs and spaces in around my text. And so it seems like an unlikely thing that simply using white space can improve much, but it actually is a evidence-based way to improve both attention and memory, and particularly in people following concussion. So as we close out this section on memory, I thought it might be helpful to have a look at the different memory strategies and just walk through a few of these. Many of these are things most of you would be immediately comfortable implementing, and I would encourage you to maybe pick one or two and begin using them and practicing. The first, of course, is something we all need to do maybe a bit more of, just to write information down. So very often I find working with patients, they're not making detailed notes and then just relying on faulty memory to hopefully hold things and stitch things together. So they might, for example, go to doctor's appointments and not make any notes while they're in there, or even make notes to prepare to take in so that we don't forget the things we wanted to run past our physicians. So writing things down, whether that's, again, using calendars or using electronic systems, whether that's a smartphone or some other digital format. Making notes really needs to be detailed, and I find a lot of patients I'm working with don't make enough details to help them when they're looking to recall it later. I sort of call these the breadcrumbs. You need to leave enough breadcrumbs or details down so you can work your way back. I find with my day planner, I try to centralize everything and keep everything into my day book, and I jot down phone messages, and when I've done a response to a phone message, I'll cross it off in my day planner, and I just try to keep everything centralized, but definitely written down. Other techniques, associations. So if we're learning new information, it's often helpful for us to make associations to something that we have learned before. So if you're meeting me, Penny, for the first time, you might have an Aunt Penny or a cousin named Penny that you could make that association, and that's going to make it more likely that you would hold on to, for example, my name if you're just meeting me for the first time. Repetition seems very obvious. I'm sure the students who would be listening to this talk would relate to the need for repetition and reading and writing and saying information over and over can really improve the likelihood of later recall. And this is because, again, we're stimulating different channels for learning and different circuitry for remembering. So repetition's definitely an excellent memory strategy. We talked about visualization a few slides before this one. The more fun and the more unusual or absurd the visualization is, the more likely you are going to be to remember it at a later point. Categorization, I mean, this goes with the decluttering movement and the simplification movement, but the idea that things that are alike should be collected and put together. So if we can group things by their function and make sure that all the things that are alike are in the same place, this is going to be a lot easier. So if we think back to the example of the grocery store, essentially what we were doing in that example is categorizing the food items. So all fruits together, all meats together, all canned goods together. So a really good technique. Another is to talk out loud. So many people, I would say, feel self-conscious, maybe talking through problems or working through things aloud, but it's really effective for remembering if you talk it out. So being able to talk through a sequence, or as you're moving from one room to another, if you're someone who's inclined to arrive at the basement having forgotten why you went there, you can talk it out from the kitchen downstairs to the basement about what it is you're going down there for. Even if you're not able to talk aloud, sometimes even just moving your lips and sort of talking under your breath a bit can help with memory. And this is true of people who are, in the workplace or people who are at school. I'll skip over cues a little bit because we did talk about setting cues and reminders, and I think you can sort of put that together. But set locations. This is something we hear a lot of patients complain about, is that we can't find our phone, or we can't find our keys, or whatever item it is. You can substitute your own personally relevant example. But if you set locations at, say, the front door, there's a basket there or a hook where keys can be hung, and you consistently assign locations where things belong, that can not only just help you, but it can help others help you. So if we have set spots in our homes where these things belong, that if someone comes along and finds an item that's not in its set location, they can put it back there. And that can just help, again, with confidence boosting. There's nothing more confidence eroding than losing things or not being able to find stuff. So set locations in your home. And lastly, we'll just talk a little bit about routine. We know that in brain injury, people do better when they have somewhat of a routine or sort of a schedule, so that things are happening roughly at the same times of day. If we think about medications, there's a reason why that we want to try to promote taking medications at the same time each day, because it's part of a routine and we're more likely to have success. So what we really want to do is promote success within whatever memory strategies you decide to try and employ. And this is just a good summarization slide for all of those memory strategies I was talking about earlier. So I just want to pause for a moment to talk a little bit about memory training apps. And I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of opportunities from different companies and different app developers to work on memory in a training in a training way. And I would caution people to think about if there is a cost associated with some of this memory training, to really be careful about purchasing. It's not like going out and making a purchase of all of these apps, or any technology for that matter, is going to improve things necessarily. And if there's a cost associated with things, it can be really problematic for people to figure out how to set those priorities, and how to, more importantly, evaluate the merits and the evidence for these applications. So one thing I would suggest is that using advice from trusted clinicians and your therapy team can be really helpful to figure out kind of what's the best fit for you if we are going to be doing training apps. It's not any question of mine that these things are entertaining and they're really quite fun. But if they're free, then that's one thing. But if you're have a cost associated, I would just caution people to maybe get some advice from healthcare professionals and other people who work in cognitive communication and memory and attention training. Speaking of that, attention and memory, we know that these functions are really affected by many things, and I've listed a few of the top ones here. Certainly, we know that as you listen to me talk and you're looking at the screen with these slides, that fatigue and cognitive load do become issues for everyone, including people with following concussion. So fatigue is one. Social communication is another aspect that impacts negatively sometimes attention and memory. Environments, whether there's, again, we talked about this at the beginning, if there's too much sound, too much visual competition for attention, it's going to have a negative impact on both our energy levels and then later recall. And then there's social and psychological impacts as well. So if we talk about fatigue first, when I ask people to raise their hand when we're in person about the number of people who are experiencing some sort of sleep disturbance, it's really a high number of hands. And so sleep disturbance happens both in falling asleep and also staying asleep. And so this is really problematic following concussion, as well as other disorders. But certainly we hear a lot of people complaining about changes to sleep and not feeling rested after a night's sleep. So what can we do about it? Well, there are a few things that our team talks about with patients within individual sessions and also within our groups. Certainly prescription medication, if it's been recommended by a physician, would be possibly a temporary solution or a long-term solution depending on your individual situation. We know that melatonin, again, you need to speak with your physician about this, but does have good response within our population of patients we see here at Parkwood, again, following concussion. In your packages, when you were triaged and initially meeting with our triage personnel, we had packages that included information on sleep hygiene, as well as different talks that we had through our Ontario telemedicine network that were speaking with experts about sleep and how to get more of it. So hopefully you do have a package. Previously we had binders, but I believe we've moved to packages that include information that is really curated and useful on this topic and really important topic of sleep hygiene and making sure that you're getting enough. If we think again about fatigue, most of you would have come through other programs or heard from other clinicians talking about pacing and planning. So we really do need to be aware of the need for pacing and planning really universally, but in particular following brain injury. So when we see individuals for the first time here at Parkwood, the graph that's on the upper part of your screen with the tall peaks and the low valleys is typically the pattern of performance that we see patients engaging in. So they wake up in the morning, they feel pretty good, they begin to start activities, and those activities could be chore-based or hobbies or have-to-do lists related to work or school. And they push through symptoms and really getting into what we call the danger zone before their system, essentially their brain, sort of turns them off, and they might begin to have a drop and feel like they can't cope anymore. It could be fatigue, it could be feeling overwhelmed, and that sort of could take some time to recover from that. So maybe it could be hours of need for rest or days or sometimes weeks for people. And then they might get up again and the next time feel like now have an even bigger list of things to plow through, and they would sort of push, push, push again until they reach the top of the next peak and then crash. And so this pattern of pushing and crashing really doesn't work for recovery all that well. And so what we do promote within our work at Parkwood and elsewhere is to really pace and plan. Looking at the bottom graph now, we can see there's still people getting up and working to activities and tasks and things they have to do, but staying sort of sub-symptoms or at least not pushing as far into the danger zone. I'm just realizing we have some updated graphs. I didn't include them here, but if you think about the space between the green area and the red area, there's really a yellow zone in here where, we're starting to see some symptom provocation and things are acting up a little bit, but we want to work sort of within the mild zone, the moderate zone, and coming in and out of activity and pacing and planning. We do this by using a timer to time out the amount of time that we're on task and the time that we're off task. So usually I'm recommending at the early stages we're working in a 20 kind of 10 20 10 pattern, 20 minutes of activity, oscillating with 10 minutes of rest. Rest doesn't mean we're going right straight to sleep or we're having a nap. It just means we're changing activity to something that is not as demanding. For a lot of people, that could be maybe taking the dog out for a walk or maybe just going outside when the weather's nice and looking, off into the distance a bit and resting those eyes if you're working on things that are up close. So pacing and planning is really what we like to think of as a foundational part of how we recover from concussion. Thinking about the environment, if we reflect back on the coffee shop noises I was playing and talking over at the earlier part of the presentation, it's really important that we are aware of the sights and sounds that are all around us, and importantly, which ones do not need to be there. So if we think about the environment that is quite stimulating, whether that's lights and sounds and movements, we hear from people who come to see us about difficulties going to busy environments like Walmart or Costco. And so if you have troubles going to these places, it's likely an environmental overstimulation problem, and it is something we need to think through about when are you going and what time of day is it going to be, and what is the length of time that you need to be there, and the items, are they well defined, or are you able to sort of get in and get out. So thinking about the environment. And so these environments are quite busy, and the lighting is quite bright, and there's a lot of movement. So it's pretty common that people would report that. So we like to share that if you're having difficulty going to these places after your injury, that you are not alone. There are ways to, simplify our immediate environments, and I'd like to take a moment to promote the importance of clutter-free environments. We know that if there are less distractions, that this improves efficiency for people. It actually reduces stress. And so if we have a lot of things around our spaces that we are either working in or living in, this can be actually very stressful and anxiety promoting. There is a website here on this slide about becoming a minimalist. I don't know if we need to go that far, but it is really important that we think about the environment, the visual environment that we're putting ourselves in for work, rest, and play. There is probably one lead example of the simplification movement, and if you have not heard of Marie Kondo, I do think there is a Netflix special talking about her work. Of course, that's a very defined system of working, but I think we can learn a few things from Marie Kondo's work. They call it the KonMari method, and it's a way to create this clutter-free environment. So it's pretty simple. It's just the idea that we would set aside time to tackle something. And for most people, we can think about one drawer in our home or one closet. where we live, where there's just maybe more chaos than it needs to be. Thinking about these 6 steps for using the KonMari method, so tidying all at once, um, discarding things. It's really simple to sort of look at the things that we're getting rid of versus those items that we have to make decisions about. We want to think about where's the destination for the items that we have in front of us. I think of this also as grouping or, like we talked about earlier, chunking things that go together. So thinking about a drawer, you might have a lot of scissors, sort of grouping these items together and visualizing where the home will be for those. In order to get rid of things, Marie Kondo promotes this idea of, does this item spark joy? And so we have a lot of things around us that we really just have there because they've always been there, not because they bring us any joy. And so she promotes this idea of picking up objects, asking ourselves, does this item bring me joy? And if it does not bring you joy, perhaps it will bring someone else joy, and then you can sort of move that along to a donation for a good cause elsewhere. Tidying by category, so thinking about what needs to be where and thinking about organizing things again by their function. Just because you have a drawer that everything gets dropped into in a certain location in your home does not mean that it can't be categorized and organized a bit better. And then you want to sort of tidy in order, not jumping around to different things because maybe you have more than one drawer or one closet, but sort of staying in order. So really thinking again about what possessions you have and what things are in your workspaces or school spaces that need to be there and maybe those that do not. Creating a clutter-free environment. I would have to say that one of the unexpected benefits of the global pandemic that we have all been living through for the past more than 2 years now is this notion of shopping online and really thinking about grocery shopping in more efficient ways. So I'm fairly confident by now. We used to promote this practice for people with concussion before the pandemic, and since the pandemic, it's been much easier for people to sort of click and then collect their grocery items curbside rather than going into the store where, again, you might encounter a lot of visual and movement stressors and noise. So thinking about, again, can you move to something where you're not having to enter stores and can do this from home? So you want to be preventative in your environments through reducing the clutter, turning off excess sounds and lights, and really planning when you go out and that you're doing that not in peak hours. Moving to social and psychological impacts on attention and memory. We know that this thing that happened to you is not what we would say is a mild traumatic brain injury, although when we say concussion and MTBI, a mild traumatic brain injury, people would say, this is anything but mild. One of the things I've learned the many years I've been working as a clinician is the importance of reframing. Again, this is an evidence-based approach to thinking about what happened to you and can we redefine what it was that happened. So when we think about reframing, we want to really think about the event and the way we experience that and trying to find ways to make it matter or have purpose within what happened. And so this is not something that's easily done and often needs the guidance of other healthcare professionals to assist. But I do think one of the losses that we have in working virtually and not being able to have groups face to face has been this loss of seeing others' stories and others' experiences and having that peer support, which I believed to be really important in people's ability to reframe what has happened to them. So, being able to speak with trusted others, people who are supportive around what happened, are really great ways to both reframe and also improve recovery in areas of attention and memory. So looking for ways to do that through peer support is really, really effective. And we all know that we are definitely living in a time of immense stress in the global pandemic. But even before this, this was a TED Talk that I liked to share within this group around making stress your friend. So we are often told that stress is to be avoided at all costs, that stress will cause us to leave this earth early, that it is definitely non-productive to our well-being, and that's actually not true. So there are different kinds of stressors that occur as part of living our lives that are very negative stressors. One of which I would suggest is, your health. But there are a number of other positive stressors that, while they cause some anxiety and maybe worries, they're actually really productive kinds of stress. And this is a great TED Talk by Ms. McGonigal, who talks about the types of stresses that are positive influences on us. And so one example I can think of is when we think about students who have had an injury or experienced a concussion that has interrupted their studies. Very often I speak with students about, yes, it is very stressful returning to school with an injury. However, the pursuit of your education and academic credentialing is actually really a positive stress, that this is something that is purposeful and it can be actually really positive overall. So we want to think about stress in different ways, and not all stress needs to be avoided. And so this is a great talk I encourage you to watch on your own time. So we're going to transition into talking a little bit more about word finding issues now. And I like to ask people to raise their hand how many of you are experiencing word finding issues, or more commonly, word formulation or idea formulation as you are speaking with others in conversation, or maybe you're even giving formal presentations. So people will describe the experience of word finding difficulty in different ways. Often people will say, it's on the tip of my tongue. I can feel like it's right there, but I can't grasp it. There are different kinds of issues with word finding. So you can have trouble remembering names or finding people's names and calling them up. You can have problems with technical vocabulary related to school or to work or just to hobbies. And then again, this formulation problem where people cannot get to their point or have trouble being succinct and being organized in their speech. So what can you do about this problem with word finding? So there are a number of things here on the screen. One is to think about using your hand to gesture. Surprisingly, if you move your hands or gesture, this will really facilitate word retrieval. We know this from other patient populations that really struggle with language. Those individuals with aphasia following a stroke really benefit from using their hand to communicate and to almost free up the space for good word finding. And you probably know people in your lives who talk a lot and gesture a lot with their hands as they speak. And arguably, if you were not allowing them to move their hands and gesture when they talked, they'd have a harder time expressing their thoughts and ideas. So another tip is to get on your feet. So wherever possible, if I'm giving a presentation that's formal and I'm concerned about my word finding, or I'm nervous at all, I'll really try to get on my feet. And that includes, even if I'm doing this virtually, maybe I'm on the phone. I can think of examples where patients tell me how stressful being on the phone can be if it's something for high stakes. So thinking about being on with your physician or an insurance adjuster can really provoke people's anxiety and stress. So a simple tip is to get on your feet, have that ability to move around, and you may find that it's easier to find your words and get your thoughts across. Very commonly, people will move naturally to describing or talking around an item that they cannot name or they can't come up with the word. So they might give a description of that thing. So if I'm trying to describe a pen and I can't find this word, I might say it's something you write with and you hold it in your hand. It's something we use in school, and that usually helps your conversational partner figure out where you are going and then maybe help you to retrieve the word you're looking for. We can also use synonyms. I think a lot of people are tough on themselves and they want the exact word they were searching for, and so nothing else will do. So if we think I'm looking for the word sofa, but I can only find the word couch, that's okay. That using a synonym can really help to keep the conversation moving, which is really the whole intent of why we communicate. We can also throw it out to our conversational partners. So we can, if we're struggling during a presentation, we might throw it out to the audience as a question or have something ready to go that we can throw it out to the communication partner by asking a question. Generally speaking, people love to talk about themselves. And so if you ask people their opinion while you're stuck or unable to come up with something, this can go a long way to sort of buying you some time and giving you the space to continue kind of searching your database for the word you were looking for. And it's really important, I've said a couple times here, that we just really remember that communication is all about messages in and messages out. We're not searching for perfection when we communicate with others, and sometimes we're much harder on ourselves than others would be in being forgiving about moments of word finding or word formulation. So just remember that messages in, messages out, that's what communication really is. So what can other people do when we are having word finding difficulties? So one of the first things I tell people, if this is describing you and you are having word finding issues, be sure to clarify what kind of assistance you want to have when you're having difficulty. So having this upfront conversation with people in your close connections is really important. Some people do not want any help. They would rather sort of struggle through or figure it out on their own. But then there's other people who maybe want a clue. So perhaps they want a first letter clue, like, can you give me the first letter, the first sound? And that can be really facilitative for those individuals. You don't want people supplying you with words if that's going to be extra frustrating. So others can really help by giving those clues, and maybe providing a bit of description can help. If you're providing a bit of description, others can help you to supply the word. So just clarifying that up front with people in your circle of care and people in your circle of trust is an important thing for preventing further frustration and anxiety and stress. So I'd like to share with you a few word finding apps, and we would loosely call these games. The evidence supporting the use of word finding apps for improving word formulation and function is a little bit mixed, but I do think that there is some merit to working on word finding games with the intention to engage in activities that are sustained attention tasks and a bit of reasoning problem solving. And I think that there's likely some merits to stimulating the circuit that is for word finding. So this one here that's on the screen is called Free Rice, and the really cool thing about Free Rice is you can play this, and at the same time you are playing, you can make donations to feed hungry people. So as you play, rice is donated and collected and donated to worthy causes, and it's in support of the United Nations World Food Program. And so while you're feeling good about working on your word finding, attention, reasoning skills, you can also be contributing to helping to solve world hunger. So on the next slide, I'll show you a few screenshots of this app. Here is the landing page for Free Rice, and you're asked to pick the best match, synonym, or definition of the word at the top. And so albacore in this case, hopefully you'd recognize it's a type of tuna, and you would make that selection. It's worth mentioning that as you are playing the game, we want to be working in a therapeutic level. So in Free Rice, one of the things I really like about it is that you can alter the difficulty level. So you can choose easy to hardest. And for most people, I'd recommend starting in around the normal range, and you want to be working at a success rate of about 75 to 80%. So this means that if you do 10 questions, you're easily getting, 7 to 8 of those, but struggling on 2 to 3 definitions. And you want to have that little bit of struggle because that's really what we call the therapeutic benefit and the therapeutic range. And so making sure that you are challenging yourself enough, that you're thinking hard about a few of the 10 questions or 10 examples you choose, and adjusting your level as you go. There are other categories as well that Free Rice does allow you to play within, everything from science to um, general knowledge to geography and history. And again, what I really like about this application is that it's web-based and it allows you to adjust the difficulty level so that you can again stay in that therapeutic range of about 75 to 80% success as you play. Other fun word finding applications. This one is both an app and web based. It's called Seven Little Words. Um, why I like this is it's really the higher level word finding and stimulation. So there are many apps that are out there to work on really pronounced word finding problems, but that's not typically the kind of word finding problems that patients post concussion have. So on this next screen, I'll show you the screenshot of how this game looks. This activity is available again as a web-based and as an application through either an Android or iOS, and it seems pretty simple on the surface. There's 7 little words. These are there are definitions. For example, on this screen we have an ad on TV, and then below that you have a series of tiles, kind of 20 tiles, and you're to combine these tiles in different ways to make the answers. On the right side of the screen, you have the number of letters that the answer contains. And so you would hopefully know that the ad on TV is likely commercial. So you would select the tiles that correspond to that. Now, I'd like to step it up a little bit when you play this activity. I would like you to play the activity, hopefully solve all 7 little words, then maybe do something separate from that activity, and then maybe come back and try to recall or remember the 7 words at a different point in time. And you can increase your challenges with this to, do the 7 little words challenge in the morning and then try to remember them, at supper or in the evening at the end of your day. We need to challenge our memory, and we need to have expectations that we'll recall so that we can again stimulate the neurocircuitry that is involved with um, recalling skills. So hopefully you have fun with that. Lastly, in the apps that I'm presenting, and again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of applications for word finding, nor is it always the best way to do things through an app, but for fun and again, for working on attention and endurance and a bit of word finding and reasoning skills, there is 4 Picks 1 Word. Again, available as an app on either platform from iOS or from Android, and you are going to be given 4 pictures that have something in common. And then you need to come up with 1 word that fits the number of blanks that are on the screen, that you can put the letters in the correct combination and hopefully get a match. So here is that screenshot of the game 4 Picks 1 Word, and you can see there are 4 pictures that have something in common, and your job is to choose the word that best makes those pictures fit together and use the letters that are provided to fill in the squares to select the correct word. And in this case, the common theme across the pictures is the word think. So, another evidence based approach to working on word finding and formulation is something called semantic webbing. And I really like this approach because it really works with words that are personally relevant or meaningful to you in some way. So if we think about a student taking certain classes, or you as someone who works in a specific field with terminology that's really specific to your area of expertise or work, then you can really customize your approach to working on your word finding using semantic webbing. And so the approach is pretty simple. You would have a keyword in the example that's in the slide deck. You'll see the word sports. And off of that, you would make associations to other words or connections to other words. And what this does is really stimulate the neural network or circuit that's associated with being able to retrieve words. For most people, the language center is associated on the left side of the brain. And so we have kind of an internal dictionary there that we use words that are already there to make connections or linkages to words that we're learning. And so we do that through this kind of semantic relationships or webbing. And so you could think if you were a student and you were in biology, you might have a very specific terminology that you're needing to be able to come up with, be able to find your words for presentations or being able to participate in class. So maybe you might have the word in the center instead of sports. You might have photosynthesis. The cool thing about students, or if you have textbooks or manuals as part of your work life, you can really turn to the back of those documents and books to find glossaries of terms and different vocabulary and different terminology that you can use to participate and play within semantic webbing tasks. So it's really pretty simple. You drop a word down in the center, and then you make spokes off of that word to other words. The harder you can make the words, the better, and challenge yourself to then make connections off of those words to other words. And really, this is how we get words into our dictionary or our lexicon, is we make these associations. So this is more of a paper and pencil task, and a pretty simple kind of low-tech way of stimulating word retrieval. We're going to switch topics to something we call social communication. And this is often affected following really many types of injury, but in particular, it's noticeable within people with mild injury or concussion. It often also goes quite undetected. We would describe patients often as walking wounded, and so they have interaction troubles maybe that don't get picked up, or they have these consequences within their social communities where they're losing friends or having more strife and difficulty than they were prior to injury. So I would ask you to think about your social communication skills following your injury. Are you having difficulty maybe saying things without thinking them all the way through? We call that language unfiltered. Perhaps you say things at the wrong time, or maybe you say things that are less appropriate than they might have been before you were injured. You may have trouble with appropriate turn taking, such that you overextend your turns, or conversely, you don't speak up when you should, and so you don't take turns. Tone of voice changes can be an issue for people, or challenges with eye contact, maintaining eye contact or feeling comfortable with eye contact. Sometimes there are changes to body language and how we are communicating with our face and hands and body. And there can be changes to overall personality. People sometimes describe that they were quite outgoing before their injury and really engaged with the people around them, and they find it more challenging to do so after injury, and they might even describe that as becoming more introverted, or at least not taking opportunities to socialize in the ways that they did before. Sometimes there is short fuse, irritability, anger, and emotionality. So people may be more likely to cry more easily, or to become angry more easily. And so these can be really concerning and upsetting to not just the individual who's experienced the injury, but also the social network of people around them, because you can imagine that the people around the person with injury are trying to support that person, but if they are having changes and challenges to social communication skills, it can really make people pull away or not want to be part of the inner circle. So I sometimes ask people to think about, have you lost friends, or are you finding it more difficult to speak up or hold back? Thinking about some of those changes can be very helpful to clinicians that are supporting you, and to people who are, again, in your community and relationship circle. So what do we do about social communication challenges? Well, there are some things we have already been talking about. You can appreciate that irritability and being short-fused could be really caused by a lack of sleep. Not getting enough sleep is definitely one of the common experiences that people after concussion report. There can be difficulty with controlling emotionality and not coping well within environments that are overstimulating. So we talked about, things being too bright or too noisy, and so you can work to control that stimulation through, being aware of it, and making adjustments and changes where you can, and it's appropriate to do so. I will say that working this long, many years now, about 20 years in brain injury, has sort of caused me to think more about universal design of environments that we find ourselves in. So if I go to a meeting where there's a group of people in a room and all of the lights have been turned on, it's not uncommon for me to maybe turn off half of the lights, or if we can work in natural light, if there's a window there, to not turn the lights on at all. And that's just really universally a good design for people not to work under fluorescent lighting. And it can really be triggering, or it can set people off with some of the challenges they have with their social communication when we do not control those environmental factors. Another thing is just recognizing that you have a problem. Sometimes when I'm sitting with people, it may be the first time that they've been asked these questions about changes to their ability to socialize and get along with and communicate with others. And so being open to that suggestion from trusted people, and recognizing that you may have issues with this, or changes within your skill set here. Um, Getting help from someone who is trusted, really important. Working with a psychologist if you have access to one, a speech language pathologist, or a social worker are all individuals who work within this realm of social communication and can help you out. So, asking yourself those questions: are you irritable, short fused, more emotional than usual? Are you having more challenges seeing different perspectives, speaking up when you need to, holding back when you should? All might be indicators that there are some changes and challenges with your social communication. Thinking about emotionality, I do find that people report a range of changes that move from sadness to, of course, fear, with the challenges in adjusting to and adapting and coping with some of the new realities, and then this irritability and anger. And so I think it's important that we do talk about mental health, and make sure that we have resources available to one another and to patients that are, easily accessed at times that are convenient and best for you. I'll share some information on the next slide about Reach Out program. So I'm going to share a couple of resources on the next couple of slides, and these are resources that our social work team at Parkwood readily makes sure that our patients have access to. So it's possible this information is repetitive or redundant to other education you're receiving from our team, but I just don't want to have this missed. So Reach Out is a service that is based actually here in London, Ontario. So if you are someone living in Elgin, Middlesex, and Oxford area, you are welcome to essentially reach out and provide a confidential or receive confidential mental health and addiction support services. The contact information is on this slide, so if you prefer to talk by phone or text or chat by internet, you're welcome to do so. They offer a number of different services, and I've tried to simplify the slide here. Definitely the web page has a lot more information on it, but I wanted to keep it simple for the purposes of just indicating that this is a service readily available that supports mental health. Additionally, in Ontario, we have the Ontario Brain Injury Association and the helpline, which is available Monday through Friday to you to receive assistance with a number of different services or connections to a number of different services. One of the things that ABI is particularly great at supporting or leading the charge is around peer support. And so they have a very formalized peer mentorship, peer support program that does try to match people with lived experience following brain injury with those who may be earlier in recovery or needing to hear from someone who's maybe in the same boat or perhaps a little further along in terms of recovery. So they do a number of training, education, and advocacy bits of work as well as research and of course that peer support. So do not hesitate to explore their website, and again this information may be coming to you through other presentations by social work. Next up, I just want to appeal to those who might be gamers and people who are interested in playing games to improve recovery. There is I think this is an app called Super Better, and I haven't checked it lately. That's why I'm hesitating, whether it's web-based or an app, but I believe it's still in app form. And I'm not going to play the video here, but if you look up Super Better, this was developed by a gamer. I believe it is Kelly McGonigal, and there's a TED Talk associated with her Super Better app and her thought about using gaming to help with recovery. And so if you're interested in playing games and being in that sort of modality for your recovery, please do check this out. So when thinking about holistic approaches to recovery, I think we would be remiss to not mention about mindfulness and yoga and the benefits that are being found, particularly in terms of stress, anxiety, worry. And we know that there are lots of benefits to relaxation and some evidence to suggest that it helps people to be more present and be able to enjoy activity and be mindful about the process as they move through recovery. So there are no end to the number of mindfulness or meditation and yoga opportunities available through the internet or through various apps. I will make a few suggestions on a slide to follow, but there is good evidence to suggest that these approaches do help with anxiety and some of the elevated stress, and it's worth taking a look at for sure. It's not harmful practice, so definitely would encourage people to explore something that's comfortable to them in these realms. So on this slide, I've presented just a couple of things that our team here has used as we have supported patients in recovery. One of those is called Calm. What's quite interesting, just recently I noticed that celebrity John Legend has now added himself to calm within sort of bedtime stories. And so for people who are having lots of sleep difficulties and disruption, there are stories that are within that Calm app that have been reported anecdotally from patients we've seen to be very helpful. There is subscription to services, and so just be mindful about paying for subscription services just in terms of the evidence, but there are a number of free components to many of the apps, and Calm and Headspace have many free elements to theirs before they'll ask about subscription services. The other one that I really like is Headspace. I enjoy sort of the tone and the playfulness of this mindfulness app, and definitely the play and the fun part of it is appealing, I think, to a lot of individuals who are going through some difficult things. Additionally, there is the UCLA Health Mindfulness Meditations, which are on the internet. If you do not have a tablet or app ability, then you can go on just the internet and check out these mindful meditations that are available through UCLA. So normally at this point we'd be completing our time together, and there may be some questions that you have about information I've presented here or related information or questions. I want to thank you for your kind attention and wishing you all the very best in your recovery.